What's going on, everybody? It's your man Ribs. So today we're going to talk about this right here. This is the Intrepid Enlarger, and this is a prototype. This product is not available for purchase yet, but I've got a prototype version here that basically functions and it has all of the necessary components in order to make prints. This thing's pretty cool, and I made a video about it, kind of an unboxing video. You can watch that here if you want. This video, I actually put this to the test and finally made a print with it, and I want to talk you through that experience. Before I say anything else, this thing is cool. And this is a pretty big deal in my opinion, because this package that you see right here basically replaces a massive kind of former version of enlargers that have existed all up until this time. So this is pretty cool. And in terms of technology, I really do think this is cutting edge. Simplifies that entire big enlarger package into just these two components, which means you can move it around easily. You can take it down when you don't want to use it and put it away and kind of repurpose the space that you have, which I think is great because I live in an apartment and my bathroom is my darkroom. So being able to move things around and kind of hide things and open space when I'm not using this equipment, that's huge. If you have a standalone darkroom in your house, let's say in your basement or in your shed or something, then this probably isn't that big a deal for you, and that's totally fine. But if you're short on space or you just don't want to have big bulky things, this is a game changer. All right, so as I mentioned, this is a prototype. So there's a couple critiques that I have of this specific unit that are going to be resolved in the actual production version of this. So just keep that in mind, because it's not necessarily that this is a bad design or anything. It's just there are things that the prototype doesn't account for yet that will be accounted for when they actually create the product. So first and foremost, the first thing that I think I need to tell you about in terms of the experience here is using a tripod. This is intended to be used on either a tripod or a copy stand, and basically you attach it and the goal is to have it face down so you can get a nice even projection that's leveled as well. You can level using the levels here. But what I found is that with a tripod, it's a bit annoying for me personally. You basically have to really create some surface area in order to really spread the legs out wide. That way, when your enlarger is projecting your image downwards, the legs of the tripod do not get in the way. You also have to lean one of the legs longer than the other. That way the enlarger itself kind of leans forward, and that helps, again, avoid any kind of blocking of the light coming out of the enlarger from the legs. If you use a copy stand, then that's not a problem whatsoever, because a copy stand doesn't have legs. It's just an arm that sticks straight up. So that's pretty cool. I will say though, I don't have a copy stand, but if I did have one, I'd probably want a bit more separation from the copy stand and the enlarger. Typically, a copy stand would probably be flush like this, and therefore you might have this side of it not be big enough to fill a full image. Therefore, my suspicion is that if you use a tripod head, for example, as an in-between, and that'll give you enough distance away from the arm. So just imagine it like this. That distance right here, that'll give you enough distance to make bigger prints and enlarge as large as you want to do. So that's kind of the first thing to note. It took me about 35-40 minutes to figure out how to set this up with a tripod to appropriately be able to pull paper in and out of my easel, and also to not block the image. And fortunately, I have a direct line to Intrepid right now because of this prototype, so they gave me some help. But nonetheless, it works. You probably do need a larger surface if you're going to use a tripod. This table that I'm using right here is probably not big enough. I did this on the ground, as you can see in the video, and on the ground you have infinite amount of space. But if you were to have this on your home, you would want a surface that's wide enough if you're going to use the tripod. If you're going to use the copy stand, then that matters a bit less. Ultimately, it does depend on the tripod you use as well. I use a Mi Photo tripod that you can see in the video here, and perhaps, its dimensions just aren't best suited for this kind of thing. But it all depends, but just keep that in mind. Second thing I want to talk about is the LED that's in here, the LED light. One thing I was curious about is how strong this light was going to be compared to a typical enlarger. And that output strength matters, because the stronger your light, then the shorter your exposure times will be. I was curious if it was going to be too strong or if it wasn't going to be strong enough. And ultimately, I found that it was strong enough to give me decent exposure times. I didn't notice that my exposures would take longer or less in a meaningful way. And therefore, I think this does the trick, no problem at all. The lights in the enlarger, traditional enlarger, are actual bulbs, which you can replace and change and all of that. This is an LED, and LEDs obviously are more advanced technology. They probably use less power. The spread of light might be more even, that kind of thing. So yeah. One thing to note about the prototype is that this particular LED that's in here actually wasn't covering the full space of the negative. I was using a 6x7 negative slotted in here, and there was a bit of vignetting on the negative. because the light itself wasn't as spread out as it should be. This is something I noted to Intrepid already, and definitely something they're going to take care of for the production unit. But at first I was getting prints that were much brighter on the corners, and that's because the light wasn't hitting it appropriately. So yeah, this enlarger is meant to do all the way from 35 millimeter up to a 6x7 negative, and therefore they're definitely going to make sure that this LED that's built into here outputs light evenly across the whole panel in order to fully illuminate any size negative within that range. All right, the last key thing I want to talk about is the controller. So as you see here, this controller has 4 major knobs. This knob right here is to control contrast for black and white. I haven't used this yet because I've only done color printing with this enlarger. And then these are your color knobs. I really love having the knobs, and I love that the knobs give you a digital readout, because one of the challenges when I'm printing with my traditional enlarger is that for me to change any settings, I have to turn on the lights, which means that my paper has to be fully protected and covered so that there's no light on it. With this, if I have my controller off to the side, I can actually just lean over, change the settings, and see the output here on the panel. I don't know if it's LED or not, but the readout here is digital, so you can see this when you're in the dark. It's not too bright where it's gonna affect anything, especially if you have it tucked away over to the side. So that was super convenient, because I could actually, in one developing cycle with my tank, I can cut a piece of paper in 2 and do 2 different exposures with different settings for test. And you can see the numbers here very clearly, and they're easier to kind of remember. With the traditional enlarger, you're reading the numbers on the dial as you turn it, and it's kind of like a needle that points to where the numbers are. I don't know, it doesn't stick to me in my mind as much. With this, it's much easier to remember what I've done. So yeah, I really like that. I think the readout here is a fantastic addition in this kind of modern digital way. On the other side of this kind of modern digital thing are these buttons. And to be honest with you, they're a bit challenging, because first of all, you can see all the buttons are the same size. And therefore in the dark, especially for color printing where it has to be pitch black, it's hard to see which one of these buttons you're touching. Especially if you're just kind of feeling for them without looking, because maybe you're looking at your easel or your surface where your paper is. You really don't know exactly what you're touching precisely. Of course, they're different and they're placed in different places, but these colors, for example, there's green, gray, and red. You're not gonna be able to see these in the dark. What I love about the timer that's attached to my traditional enlarger is that there's one button, and that button does 2 things. If you flick it up, it turns on your enlarger for focusing, which means just a steady light that just stays on the entire time until you flick it back down. And again, it's this large button. It's like this big and you can't miss it. That same button, if you press it down, if you hold it, that charges up the timer. When you let it go, it initiates the timer and your time goes, and then it ends. So that one button does the 2 most essential functions that controller is intended for. With here, you've got separate buttons for these functions. And of course, you've got 2 buttons here to change the amount of time. Traditional timer, you just turn the knob and you can just see it very easily. That analog style is extremely convenient, because what's easier than going like this, Here, you have to hold the button to make it travel up and down in terms of the amount of time. You can precisely do it by tapping as well, but it just feels a bit cumbersome compared to that traditional dial. So I much prefer the traditional timer than using these buttons, but I do prefer the dials on here. So it's kind of a half and half situation, just something different. If you've never used a traditional timer, then it probably won't make a difference to you. The last thing I want to note is perhaps a bit strange, but it's something that I definitely just felt while I was working. When you're printing in the darkroom, there are sounds, especially for the timer, the enlarger itself. All those things make noise because they're kind of mechanical things, and they're moving, and there's sometimes moving parts inside of them too. The enlarger kind of buzzes when you turn it on, and it also, you can hear this like the bulb kind of powering up and off. And then the timer itself, first of all, it functions like one of those old school timers that you turn. So you hear the click, 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 click as it's going around. And then when it hits the 0, you hear this like, kind of hard click where it means like you're done. And these are cues that I just got used to, and they're part of the experience. They don't really make a difference, but they just, that's what I know when it comes to printing. With this, there are no sounds at all. This LED doesn't make a sound. The controller doesn't make a sound. When your exposure is done, it just turns off and becomes dark again, but there's no sound. And it doesn't really matter. Again, it doesn't make a difference in the actual process, but it's this interesting thing about, the analog world versus this digital world. They're just very different, and the sound is completely different between the two. There really is no ASMR potential for this, whereas a traditional enlarger has a lot of ASMR that goes with it. I still welcome this because although this is a very different experience in many ways, it's bringing a lot of new things to the table. And again, look at this. Imagine me trying to ship my enlarger across the country to somebody. It would be impossible. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are you excited about this product? Are you thinking about getting one? Talk to me. All right, y'all, that's what I got for today. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like, and of course, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. Till the next video, y'all. Peace.